Today you will begin by reflecting on past learning. Then you will be able to identify differences between discovery and reception learning theories. You will connect existing knowledge about learning to discovery and reception learning. And finally, if you would want to, you could read scholarly articles about the two educational philosophies. A question that all educational philosophers and psychologists want to know is, how does the mind work? And we want to know the answer to this question so that we can help students learn better and more successfully and retain more information. So in cognitivism, one type is discovery learning. Discovery learning really tries to answer the question, what do the students want to learn? And then the teacher constructs a structured way for the student to discover the learning and information on their own, something that they're interested in. In reception learning, the student is gaining information more through a direct route of the teacher or reading information from a book. I'd like you to take a second and think about something that you learned in school that you still very clearly remember today. And then think, how did you learn about it? Did you discover the information on your own in a semi-structured environment in school, like maybe a project, something that you were able to choose that you were interested in? Or were you given the information through a lecture, a book, something more traditional? The difference between discovery and reception learning can be summarized with these two little pictures. On the left, the little girl is discovering that a stove is hot and that you can get burned from touching a hot stove. Because she's thinking and wondering about the stove, she goes over and discovers that the stove is hot by actually touching it. Whereas in reception learning, the little boy is learning that a hot stove will burn him by reading the information in a book. Now, some philosophers would argue that discovery learning is more successful. Some philosophers would argue that reception learning is better and more successful for students. And there really is no right or wrong answer here. It really depends on the teacher and the student and how the lesson is constructed. First, we're going to talk about discovery learning. The main philosopher behind discovery learning is Jerome Bruner. He said, learners are encouraged to discover facts and relationships for themselves. Discovery learning is mostly question-based. The student has something they'd like to know about, they question it, and they seek out answers. In discovery learning, the learner finds out and discovers what they want to learn. Now, in a way, this could be time-consuming, depending on the amount of structure. The teacher is more of a guide instead of a direct instructor in this situation. Discovery learning can be solitary, as opposed to an entire class all investigating the exact same thing. Also, there can be more flexibility in discovery learning, how they're looking up information, what they're physically doing to learn information, how long it takes, the learning environment, things could all vary. So therefore, the student has a little bit more freedom, but there is also structure. It's important to remember that discovery learning does not necessarily mean that there is no structure. There are several benefits for discovery learning. First of all, the student develops very important problem-solving skills. This is important in life in general, as well as future employment opportunities. Employers are always looking for people who have real-world skills, like the ability to solve problems in any situation that arises. Also, the student's motivation will go from extrinsic to intrinsic. So instead of being motivated by external things like grades or rewards, the student investigates things because they intrinsically want to know about the information and seek it out and explore. Also, the student's memory retention often improves, partially because they are investigating something that they are already interested in themselves and not just being told to learn about. Also, the students' independence increases because they are learning and discovering their own. And also, it's good to give them a freedom to choose what they're learning about. There are several steps or ingredients to successful discovery learning. First, the experience should offer different options for students to keep them interested. So the outcome of the project or investigation should not be a fixed result. Next, there should be a simple, concise structure articulated by the instructor or teacher so the student knows the expectations. Finally, as a result, their motivation should increase and move from extrinsic to intrinsic. Now, when I was teaching high schoolers, specifically high school freshmen, I assigned them a project to investigate a controversial issue. Now, I would consider this a discovery learning project because the students were first given a choice what controversial issue they would like to investigate. Second, they were given the choice whether they wanted to work independently or with a partner. Third, they investigated on their own through internet resources as well as book resources. And then finally, the way they demonstrated knowledge of a controversial issue varied. They could have a choice to write a dramatic script of a discussion or argument between two different viewpoints on the controversial issue. They could write a research paper, including internal citations, or they could deliver a speech. Next, we will learn a little bit about reception learning. Now, the primary educational philosopher behind reception learning is David Ausubel. He said, "The most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach him accordingly." Ausubel felt that in order to make meaning, the learner needed to connect new ideas to their prior knowledge. In reception learning, the instructor may convey information through speaking or reading. Also, it's important to remember that most traditional school learning is reception learning, and most people have been through a traditional school process. Also, reception learning does require a teacher since most of the information is being transmitted through an instructor. But it's important to remember that reception learning is not just rote learning. It is not just information given to the student to memorize. Ausubel was very clear that reception learning is based on meaning making. Now, some benefits of reception learning. First, it takes less time than discovery learning. Second, it's also a more convenient way to transmit knowledge in a classroom setting. One way that Ausubel felt learners could make meaning and connect it to new information is to use advanced organizers. Advanced organizers help link new learning material with existing related ideas that the student already knows about, often called prior knowledge. Now, one way that I've done that in this presentation so far is when I asked you to think about something that you learned in school that you still very clearly remember. And then I asked you to think about how you learned that information. Subsumption is another concept that Ausubel is trying to tell us about. It's when new unencountered information is compared or contrasted with existing information and brought into students' cognitive structure. Now, an example in order to clarify the difference between discovery and reception learning is learning about wine. Now, obviously, this example is for those of you who are over 21. But in order to learn about wine, let's say we're going to take the discovery learning approach. This would occur if the student, first of all, chooses to want to learn about wine, or is given the option to learn about wine and chooses to. Now, they might be given some information, or they might be seeking out information online, or from an instructor, or from people who are more knowledgeable than themselves about wine. Then they also might try wine and note the different flavors and textures and scents of the wine. Now, if somebody is going to learn about wine through reception learning, this is going to be a little bit of more traditional learning way, something that most people are familiar with from their public school education, more traditional education. A teacher would impart information either through readings or lecture about wine, maybe show pictures, and the student is a little bit more passive. However, Ausable would argue that the student would still need to make meaning by connecting their prior knowledge and experiences to the new information that they're learning about wine. Now, next I'd like you to read the article called Learning by Discovery by David Ausable. After you've read this article, please think and reflect and try to answer the following 2 questions. Now you are ready for a quiz. The following statements should be answered with either true or false. As you go through the statements, click either true or false to find out if you are correct. Now you are ready for your multiple choice quiz. The following 2 questions have only one answer, and you should click your answer of A, B, C, or D to find out if you are correct.